Welcome back to part 4 of our week 2 photo history lecture. This would have come at the end of the last video, but my software limits me to 15 minutes max at a time, so this is the last bit that we had to consider. So we're gonna resume looking at these Harry Callahan photos of his wife Eleanor, and we're going to use them to compare some different ways, some different frameworks that people use to interpret photographs. So some interpretive perspectives. A common one is just comparative interpretation. So as we look at these photos, we might compare them with other photos that artists have made of their spouses or lovers or significant others. We might compare them with other photographs that Harry Callahan made of other subject matter. We would then compare all of the photographs that Harry Callahan made of his wife. So we're looking at these relative to potentially a lot of other things to try and sort of triangulate what it was he was trying to do with each one. Another way of interpreting it would be the so-called archetypal interpretation. This would be where we're considering the possibility that maybe in these photographs he's trying to elevate her to some sort of universal, almost mythical status, where the particularities of Eleanor Callahan are less important and he's trying to universalize her in some way. Another would be a feminist interpretation that looks at these from the possibility that maybe he's treating her as a possession and that these are a form of Harry Callahan oppressing his wife. That's one that some critics have taken of these photos. Another would be a psychoanalytic interpretation. So we'd be bringing a kind of a Freudian analysis to this and looking at them from the perspective that maybe they're some kind of manifestation of repressed things in his psyche or things of that nature. Next would be the formalist interpretation, where you just restrict yourself mainly to the way that he has used composition in each of these photos. Semiotic interpretation would be looking at them in terms of how they do what they do. Next we have Marxist interpretation. Interpreting a photograph this way would be looking for manifestations of larger societal developments in social history in addition to photo and art history. So we might be looking at it in terms of what can this tell us about the way that capitalists have alienated us from our own labor. Next would be looking at it through the lens of stylistic influences. So the meaning is partially determined by considering how the work was influenced by previous artists' work. Next, biographical interpretation, how the artist's life experiences influence the work. Given that this is his wife, that might be a fairly important one to consider. Intentionalist interpretation. Like we mentioned in the last video, we would want to look and see, did he write or talk about these anywhere? Next would be a combination approach, where maybe we're borrowing some from intentionalist, so we want to know what was his intention. We might want to know some biographical, stylistic influences, comparing with other photos of his and other artists, and it may be, a little bit from all of these. These are just a few approaches that can be used that you might encounter in an art or photography magazine where someone is reviewing work. They might be coming at it from some of these angles. There's more than this, as you can imagine. You could have as many perspectives as there are reviewers. Something to consider: we don't really ever criticize a photo or think critically about it in a vacuum, but in a way we have almost a community of critics and reviewers. So think of people whose job is they get paid to review things in magazines. Could be curators of museums and galleries, historians, other artists. And like we talked about before, in a sense, anybody who looks at a piece of work and has an opinion about it they too can be a critic. So there's a lot of us. So the reputation and the place that a photograph has in photo history ends up being determined by a lot of different things. It's partly this community of curators, historians, reviewers who help decide whether it's important or meaningful. It may also be because of if it's a photograph that's been seen by a lot of the public and moved a lot of people, then that could be part of it as well. As we return to the Harry Callahan examples with the photographs of his wife Eleanor, as it turns out, some of the biographical information and the intention turns out to be pretty important. He talked about these while he was alive. And as you can imagine, we have to take that with a grain of salt, because if he was, as the feminist interpretation would indicate, if these were a means of oppressing his wife, he's probably not going to come out and say that he's trying to oppress his wife with his photographs and treat her as a possession. So we know what his intent was. For him, his wife was kind of a calming influence in his life, something that centered him and brought him peace. After he died, his wife talked about those photographs, and she seemed to view them in a similar way. She trusted him and learned over the years that when he would ask her to take a photograph, she would go along with it because she loved him and she knew that something really interesting would come from it. So she seemed to enjoy being the subject of his photographs. And I think she understood that when you look at the variety of ways that he photographed her, it seems that she understood that this was partly how he's working out different ways to treat other subject matter as well. But there's lots been written about him and his photographs of her. I definitely recommend. We don't have time to go deep into it here, but you can find lots available on the internet and in books and journals. It's pretty interesting to read about. So I just thought we would show briefly a few different ways that one could approach interpreting a photo and how necessary it is to gather the relevant information so that your interpretation will seem plausible. I think even with these Harry Callahan examples, we can't necessarily rule any of them out completely. There are some that seem pretty strong, but I think just about any of them could still be on the table. And the last, combining lots of these, I think is a good way is to look at it from a lot of different angles. And you'll, I think, achieve what Terry Barrett described with his definition of art criticism, which is looking at the photograph through a multitude of different perspectives and angles will help you understand and appreciate and hopefully cherish the photo by the time you've finished.